When you hear the name the Boston Strangler, you instantly get this image of a complete nightmare.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a crime wave that basically paralyzed eastern Massachusetts from 1962 to 1964.
A level of terror nobody had seen before.
And it claimed the lives of, between 11 and 13 single women. And for half a century, one name has been just fused to that moniker. Albert DeSalvo.
It's the only name people know.
Exactly. But the deeper you get into this case, the more that whole connection just kind of dissolves. I mean, sure, DeSalvo gave this spectacular, incredibly detailed confession.
He did.
But his role was always surrounded by, massive doubt. We're talking conflicting facts, absolutely zero physical evidence at the time, and this intense media pressure to just close the case.
And a very suspicious jailhouse informant.
Right. Our sources show this isn't just a true crime story.
Right.
It's really a study in how easily a contaminated narrative can just become history.
That is exactly why we're here. We really need to dissect the central tension of the Boston Strangler case. Our mission for you is to get a quick but really thorough understanding of that fear in the early 60s, why DeSalvo's confession was somehow both convincing and totally useless in court.
And the DNA.
And most importantly, how modern DNA finally gave us a definitive answer for one victim, Mary Sullivan, but at the same time forced authorities to admit the truth about all the other cases.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the panic, the thing that created the legend in the first place.
The time frame itself is actually pretty short, but it was so concentrated. You're looking at June of 62 to January of 64.
Just about 18 months.
Right. And in that time, you have this relentless string of homicides across Boston, Cambridge, Lynn. And what was immediately so terrifying was the range of the victims. I mean, you had women as young as 19 and others as old as 85.
So no one felt safe. It wasn't one demographic being targeted.
Exactly. It maximized the public fear.
And the thing that really baffled police was how he was getting in. I mean, you look at the crime scene reports from back then, and the one universal thing was no signs of forced entry.
None. It's a terrifying thought, right? A killer who can just talk his way into your home.
So that's how the legend of the Phantom Fiend or Phantom Strangler got started.
Yep. The public just assumed he was charming or trustworthy, maybe even impersonating a repairman or something. And the media, which was, sensational from day one, needed a catchy name.
And that's where the Boston Strangler comes from.
It was actually two investigative reporters, Gene Cole and Loretta McLaughlin, who coined that lasting moniker.
But the MO itself, it was all over the place, wasn't it? If you're looking for a serial killer's signature, you want consistency.
And that's the core problem. I mean, most victims were sexually assaulted and strangled, usually with their own clothing, like a stocking or a scarf. But the methods just varied way too much.
How so?
Well, you have one victim strangled, and then you have another, Beverly Sammons, who was reportedly stabbed 22 times. In another case, an older victim seems to have died from a heart attack during the assault.
Those are huge deviations. It's those kinds of things that would fuel, 5 decades of skepticism from experts?
How can one man's behavioral pattern stretch so thin across 13 crime scenes? It's an inconsistency criminologists flagged immediately, but the public just wanted an answer. And that brings us to the man everyone thinks is the killer, Albert DeSalvo.
And DeSalvo wasn't even on the radar for the stranglings at first, right? He was arrested in late 64 for a completely different set of crimes.
A totally different series. Non-fatal assaults, rapes. He was known as the Green Man or the Measuring Man.
The Measuring Man.
Yeah, he'd claim he needed to measure women for modeling jobs. He was a known sexual predator, an army vet, but honestly, kind of a bungling criminal. He was not on the official suspect list for the Strangler, which had over 300 names on it.
So how does this Measuring Man suddenly become the Boston Strangler?
Well, that's the most controversial part of the whole story. While he was being held at Bridgewater State Hospital for psychiatric observation, DeSalvo confessed.
But not to the police.
No. He confessed to his cellmate, a man named George Nassar. Now, Nassar was a convicted murderer himself, but he had these high-profile connections. He immediately called his own celebrity attorney, F. Lee Bailey.
And Bailey sees the trial of the century.
Of course. And DeSalvo was able to convince Bailey because he allegedly knew details about the crime scenes that were never released to the public, peculiar knowledge.
Right.
The detail Bailey always brought up was a piece of furniture. DeSalvo correctly described a blue chair at one scene, but the victim who of the Abada body had mistakenly recalled it as brown. That kind of insider detail seemed to prove it was him.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Despite this supposedly airtight confession, The police found zero physical evidence. No fingerprints, no hair, no fibers, nothing, to connect Albert DeSalvo to any of the 13 Strangler crime scenes.
And that lack of evidence created this massive legal problem. So DeSalvo goes on trial in 1967, but he's only prosecuted for the unrelated Measuring Man rapes.
Wait a second. So he was never formally charged with any of the Strangler murders?
Never. Not a single one.
So the public has their guy, the media has their killer, but legally, the biggest crime wave in the city's history is still technically unsolved.
It was a political and legal firestorm. The confession was ruled inadmissible.
Why?
Well, likely because of how it was obtained. Through a jailhouse informant, questions about DeSalvo's mental state, lack of a lawyer when he first started talking. So with no physical evidence, prosecutors couldn't risk a massive murder trial on a confession they couldn't even use.
So he just got life for the rapes.
Exactly. And the stranglings were just set aside. They became cold cases, even though the public thought they had their answer.
And that's why the skepticism just never went away.
Yeah.
It's hard to trust a conviction when the only evidence is a confession that wasn't even allowed in court.
The doubt was immediate, especially from a behavioral science perspective. I mean, former FBI profilers were openly saying that the idea of a single killer was inconceivable behaviorally.
Because of the different victim types and the MOs.
Exactly. The victim selection, the geography, how differently they were treated, it all pointed to multiple perpetrators being incorrectly lumped together under that one media-friendly name.
And a lot of that skepticism focused on the cellmate, George Nassar, as the one who kind of orchestrated the whole thing.
Nassar was the key. DeSalvo was described as a compulsive confessor, someone who just desperately wanted to be famous.
Or infamous.
Right. And Nassar, this highly intelligent murderer, he allegedly saw an opportunity. He fed DeSalvo the gruesome details that only the killer or someone very close to the investigation would know.
And why? Why would they do all that?
Money and legal help. The sources are pretty clear this was a business move. They planned the confession to get F. Lee Bailey, who was famous and expensive, and then to get a big book deal. The notoriety was currency.
The confession was designed to provide for DeSalvo's family through the book profits.
It was. And it worked for a while.
But the story gets even darker when you look at how DeSalvo's life ended. He actually recanted his confession later on, said he was lying, and then in 1973, he's found stabbed to death in the prison infirmary.
And his murder is still unsolved.
Which just poured jet fuel on all the conspiracy theories.
Of course. If Nassar, who architected the whole story, stood to lose his book deal because DeSalvo was recanting, the speculation was that Nassar had him killed to shut him up.
So for decades, you have this intense doubt, legal uncertainty, behavioral problems, political pressure. But then the 21st century comes along.
And technology changes everything. Thanks to federal funding for cold cases, the focus came back to the Boston Strangler, specifically on the very last victim, 19-year-old Mary Sullivan.
Okay, so we have 50 years of doubt piled up. How did modern forensics, the actual science, cut through all of that noise?
They used a really sophisticated method called YSTR testing. This is key. The Y chromosome is passed down almost unchanged from father to son. So all the men in a single paternal line, father, son, nephew, they all share the same YSTR profile.
So since DeSalvo was dead, they couldn't just get a sample from him. They had to go through a relative first.
That's right. Investigators got a DNA sample from a discarded water bottle used by one of DeSalvo's nephews. They then compared that DNA to seminal fluid that had been preserved from Mary Sullivan's body and from a blanket at the scene.
And what did that familial match show them?
The first result was huge. The YSTR profile matched the crime scene evidence. It excluded 99.9% of the male population. It basically said the killer is in the direct male line of the DeSalvo family.
But to put Albert DeSalvo's name on it after 50 years, a familial link isn't enough. You need a direct match.
Precisely. So to eliminate all doubt, they got a court order and exhumed DeSalvo's remains in July 2013. They took DNA from a femur and 3 teeth.
And the results?
An exact match. The DNA from his bones was an identical match to the seminal fluid found at Mary Sullivan's crime scene.
That is absolute scientific confirmation. What were the odds?
The odds that any white male other than Albert DeSalvo left that evidence were calculated at 1 in 220 billion.
Billion with a B.
That level of certainty just overrides everything. 5 decades of doubt, coached confessions, legal games. It's all gone.
And the reaction from the victim's family really tells the story. Mary Sullivan's nephew, Casey Sherman, who'd been a very vocal skeptic of DeSalvo's guilt, he publicly accepted it, said it was definitive closure for his aunt's case.
It ended his personal doubt finally.
So what does this all mean? We have a definitive forensic answer for one of the Boston Strangler victims. Does this finally close the whole case?
It closes one case. It definitively confirms that Albert DeSalvo was the rapist and murderer of Mary Sullivan. Her homicide is now officially solved.
But, and this is a huge bit, but prosecutors were very quick to say that the DNA evidence applies only to Mary Sullivan. What about the other 10 or 12 cases?
They remain officially open cold cases under active investigation by the Boston police. And this is the ultimate takeaway from the whole thing. Proving DeSalvo killed one victim doesn't magically fix all the profound behavioral inconsistencies across the rest of the murders.
So the science confirms DeSalvo was a killer, and he was operating at that time, but it doesn't solve the age range, the different MOs, the 22 stab wounds in the Samans case.
Yeah.
All the things that made people think it was multiple killers in the first place.
It confirms there was never one single Boston Strangler. That title was a media and political creation. It was an umbrella that, grouped together the work of at least two, probably several, unrelated killers during that 18-month window.
And DeSalvo was one of them.
DeSalvo was one of those killers. He was just the one who confessed to all of it, but he was almost certainly not the only one.
That is the truly chilling conclusion we're left with, isn't it? The Boston Strangler case is less a single solved crime and more this complicated historical file. One case is definitively closed by science, and a whole collection of others are still completely unresolved.
And that leads us to the final thought for you to explore. Given that science proves DeSalvo killed Mary Sullivan, but authorities admit the other 10 to 12 cases are still open, you are left with the reality that the Boston Strangler was likely a creation that let other killers go completely undetected in the 1960s. You have to ask yourself, why do you think the intense pressure of the time made everyone, the public, the justice system, so eager to accept the simple single-killer story of Albert DeSalvo, even with no real proof for most of the victims? And what was the cost the city paid for that rush to closure?